I moved to Echo Bay in 1984. But because they're the top of the, or they feed the top of the food chain, the bears, the whales, my community, I gradually became aware of them, and you guys know better than me, but they really feed their world. These sockeye that came in this year, I did a rough calculation. If there was 13 million fish caught, it was approximately a $500 million commercial fishery, and then they packed 50 million kilograms of food up and distributing themselves to the watershed. Anissa's traveling with me, and Don Staniford, and it doesn't all look like around here. They're not all the runs are great. So when Salmon Farms first moved in, I thought, good idea. I even got a job on one, and for a while the fish farmers lived in our little community. There's no roads here. There's no electricity. You got to make your own. It's a really super wonderful way of life. So here's a picture of it. Echo Bay is kind of in the middle there on Guilford Island, and that big inlet is Knight's Inlet, and then just at the top you're seeing the bottom end of Kinkham Inlet, and that's where they put the fish farms.
Oh.
Now, when I was when these things started to go in, I didn't know anything. They looked fine to me, but the fishermen were going, they're putting them in all the wrong places, because they're putting them places that was the prawn hotspots, the rock cod hotspots, and where both the juvenile and the adult salmon would hang out. Like right here, Sergeant's Path, the Night Inlet, Chinook would sit there, and that was like the place to fish Chinook and Lower Knight's Inlet, and boom, they put a farm there. And so these are basically the migration routes that come from our various rivers. So you got the Kleena, Glendale, Kakweek, and Ada, and then up there is Kinkham and Wakeman, and there's a few rivers over there. I was pleading with government, let's just leave one route open when the fishermen started to warn me, but the fish farmers said they needed 10 farms per area, and they let 3 companies get in. So they put farms everywhere. And it was such a frustrating process because, for example, the Minister of Environment told me, I said, look, you've got them on every single migration route now. And he said, oh, that's your opinion. I was like, no, that's not my opinion. They'd have to climb out of the water and go over the land. It's no physical way out. So it was...
So when did they put them in there, please?
So I got there in 84. The first farm went in 87. And then they didn't really start to multiply until the early 90s. And this is what we think of them now. Now, if you look at the politics of this situation, in 91, John Litnam from the Norwegian Parliamentary Committee on the Environment. So this man came from Norway. He said, we're very strict about the environment questions. Therefore, some of the fish farmers went to Canada. They said, we want bigger fish farms. We can do as we like. That is a very hot subject, I think. So this is in the Hansard. This was told to our federal politicians, and this is just when the industry was exploding everywhere. Bigger farms, more farms. This show I actually made for Norwegians. I went over to Norway, so I wanted the Norwegians to know what we think of this industry. And there's a lot of comics out there. I collect them now, of course, on sea life. This is one of the more bizarre ones. So the first casualty was the killer whales. They played very loud sounds by the farms to scare the seals away, because the seals really were attracted to these things. These are really fat fish. The commercial fishermen bring them to me all the time, and when you open them up, you can scoop the flesh off the skin and make a snowball of it, because there's no tone, and then the white. There's big white stripes in it for fat, and there's fat twined around all the organs. So the seals like that, but the loud sounds displaced the killer whales. Killer whales, one family after the next heard it, and they never came back. So I wrote a paper on that. Then we began to catch Atlantic salmon in our little coho hatchery, where I was a volunteer, with sores on it like that, which turned out to be furunculosis, which is a bacterial disease. And this was a big concern to those of us running the hatchery, because in 1991, because we used to associate with the farmers at first. They were our friends. They moved into the community. They did keep the school open for a while, and we talked a lot over beers and stuff. And they're like, yeah, we're dealing with this big epidemic right now. And we go, oh, what is it? Furunculasis. And then boom, all our coho came back with it. And that's when I started asking the fish farmers, okay, so we have furunculasis in our hatchery, and you've got it on your farm. What strain do you guys have? Because there's like 3 or 4 different strains. And they're like, oh, it's different. Yeah, well, what strain do you have in case we get it? And this went on for months and months, and eventually they said to me, oh, we already gave you that. You know, it was just this game of they wouldn't give it to me, then they said they had given it to me. They never did tell us. And that was the beginning of the disease secrecy that continues to this day. So in the year 2000, I hounded the commercial fishermen on all the VHF channels, and there was, I don't know exactly how many were caught, something like 10,200 and something Atlantic salmon were caught in that season. There happened to be 2 escapes. That gave me a lot of chance to really look at these fish, because we know what day, in the end, we know what day they got out. The gill netters were getting like 250 a day, and so they went to the fish farm and they said, look, you guys must have a hole. The fish farmers didn't think they had a hole, and then they went and checked. In fact, they did have a hole. And so on the first week, the guys fished them. They were just coming out of the pen, and they gave me all of the fish they had that week. My boat was like full of them. And then the second week, they had closed the pen, and instead of being full of pellets, some of them were eating styrofoam, some of them were eating alder catkins, some of them were eating little sticks. And by the third week, 20% of them had wild food in them. They had shrimp, smoked little fry, and some fish that was so digested I couldn't figure out what it was. If you look at the teeth of these Atlantic salmon, these fish have been domesticated for generations, but they have huge, sharp teeth on them. And when I go up to the pens and I look in the pens, they're leaping with fry. The people working on the farm say they're full of herring, black cod, shiner perch, ling cod, rock cod. They have big lights on at night, and I think that these fish farmers are getting a free lunch out there. The biggest problem in my mind is the disease. So in the wild, as soon as the fish starts to wobble, boom, there's a predator to take it out, whether it's a merganser after the fry or it's a killer whale or sea lion after the bigger fish. Epidemics just don't really happen in fish because, first of all, salmon are moving all the time, so the sick and the weak are left behind, and there's predators on them, honing them and all this. But what happens with the farms is they're sitting right there on the migration routes, as you saw, and the wild fish go by, they infect them occasionally, and then once they get in the farm, it transfers fish to fish to fish to fish, and next thing you know, it's coming out in a very unnatural pulse. It's like a cloud. And so this was an IHN outbreak that we had at the base of Kinkham Inlet, and we have not had a good herring run since. IHN also kills herring as well as salmon. And so the company said that they put their farm under quarantine. How do you quarantine 600,000 fish that are in a net pen with the current running through? You could do this. This is what they do. You go visit a farm, they're going to put little blue booties on you, but it does nothing for these enormous walls of nets. Everything passes through. They're probably the only farmers in the world that never shovel their manure. They have them in net pens, so everything will drop through. And so it's kind of, it's a big concern. I mean, it would be a joke if it was funny, but it's a big concern in my area.